these are the materials I'm going to be working with to create this jumpsuit. I have a separate video dedicated to the pattern tutorial for this jumpsuit design, and I'm going to be linking it down below, so please check that out if you haven't seen it already. I got myself a pink long zip that is 60 centimeters long, and I love this combination of print and plain, which I actually received as a gift from my mom, and it's sort of kente inspired, which is a Ghanaian print, and it works really well with this plain one that had these sort of engraved lines in it. The material just feels really cool. I also got myself some interfacing, which I'm going to be using to stiffen the facing that I will be attaching around the neckline of the jumpsuit. So now on to the cutting. So I just wanted to point this out to you guys if you'll be recreating it for yourself. As you can see, I've pinned down my main front panel, but because of the shape of the neckline, remember to pin your facing in the reverse direction, because you're going to sew your facing in such a way that it goes inside of the jumpsuit. So if you cut your facing in the same way you cut your neckline, but you want to cut it out in fabric, ensure to pin it on the reverse direction. This was something I actually learned from my previous internship, and believe me, if you're not going to be using a sort of symmetric neckline that you can get away with just pinning in whatever direction you want to pin, you have to do it this way if you're going to be working with asymmetric necklines and facings. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and cut out the different pieces of this jumpsuit. Right now I'm cutting out the front, cutting around the neckline, around the shoulder, and so on. But I'm also going to mark my notches by just cutting a tiny snip using my scissors. So you can move the pattern up and just cut only the material if you don't want to sort of mess up your pattern. But I just like to cut both the paper and the fabric like this. So with the front cut out and the top half settled, I'm going to go ahead and cut my bottom piece in the other plain material, because I thought it was just a really nice contrast to have one part pattern and one part plain. I've also gone ahead and added a 4 centimeter hem allowance to my original pattern design, because I just wanted to be sure that the trouser will be long enough for me. So these are all of my pieces cut out and laid down flat. As you can see, I have already fused my facings, which means I've ironed the interfacing on the wrong side of the facing piece, and this will just make the neckline really stiff and stable. I've also gone ahead and I've cut my back pieces and my back facings as well. I've also fused those guys so they are ready to sew. I've also cut out my sleeve, and I played around with the print in such a way that it had this band at the hem, which connected really well with the strip that I'm going to be using to create that sort of round balloon shape that is on the bottom half of the sleeve. So depending on the print you're working with, you can just have fun and really create cool dimensions with how you place your patterns. So I've cut 2 pieces for the sleeve and 2 pieces for the strips I'll be using to create the balloon, and I've also cut my trouser pieces. I cut the pocket in such a way that the plain part is the facing and the print is the pocket bag that you can see here, because I just thought it would look really nice if you just saw it like peeking prints in the side of the pocket, and it just connected really well to the top half of the jumpsuit, so there's like a kind of correlation between the plain and the pattern. So this jumpsuit has 3 main parts: the top bodice, the sleeve, and the trouser with the pockets, and we're going to be starting with the top bodice. And the first thing I like to do whenever I'm working with bodice or anything that has dots is I just like to get the dots out of the way. So I've laid down my pattern flat, and I'm just using a pin to transfer my dart point, and I'm marking that with a chalk. So I'm transferring the dots for the waist and for the side, which is the bust dart as well, and I'm just going to go ahead and pin this in place. So when it's time for me to go to my machine, I don't really have to think a lot about where my dart stops or where it ends, because I already marked it with a chalk, and I'm just pinning this securely before sewing on my domestic machine. Using a normal straight stitch, I'm going to go in and sew my darts, and the way I finish up my darts is I reverse the stitch and go back into the original stitch and reverse backwards. Some people like to sort of end their stitch at the end of their darts and then pull out the garment and then tie a knot, but whichever method works for you is absolutely fine. I'm going to repeat the same process on the back of the top bodice. I'm just going in here to mark my darts using a pin to transfer the exact point, and then using a chalk to mark that point, doing it on the left and on the right hand side before going ahead to use pins to just sort of, align the edges of the notches in place, and then just pin up 1 or 2 points up until where your dart ends. Once those are pinned and secured, I'm going to go ahead and sew using a normal straight stitch on my domestic machine, starting from the beginning, getting all the way to the end, and doing the reverse stitch to secure the dart so it doesn't unravel with time. So now that I'm done sewing all of my darts for the back, for the front, and for the side as well, I'm going to pin together the side and the shoulder seams because we're going to be sewing them next. So I'm just going to sew the sides and the shoulders on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, as well as sew in a zigzag stitch because my overlocker has decided to, move on to the afterlife, and repairing it is more expensive than getting a new one. So I'm saving up for a new overlocker, and hopefully I should be able to get one soon so I wouldn't have to do this zigzag stitch. So with my side and shoulder seams done, we have sort of the top half relatively complete. The next thing we need to think about is actually fixing the sleeve, and the sleeve has the simple top and it also has that round balloony bottom, and we're going to be working on that next. I have taken the liberty to pin together the side seams for my left and right sleeve, and I'm going to go ahead and join the side seams first before fixing in the bottom half. So I'm just sewing in here on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and I'm going to go ahead and do my zigzag stitch to secure my seam. This you can skip if you have a functioning overlocker, but I just think it has a way of really making the insides of your garments look really clean and professional. So now I'm going to focus on the round balloon of my sleeve. So the first thing I'm going to do is to create a channel on one end. The channel is about 3 centimeters wide, and the top part I'm going to create a gathered stitch to ruche everything in. So in here I have folded by 3 cm and folded in again by about 1.5 cm, and I'm just sewing this from point A to point B, leaving the ends open because we need to put an elastic through. So next up here, I'm just sewing with my biggest stitch, which I'll be using to create the gathers on the top of that particular piece. So now I'm just going to work on one sleeve to explain how this process actually works, and then you can create the other one afterwards. You also need an elastic that is about the same measurement as your wrist. I worked with a 20 cm long slim elastic, and I'm going to be passing that through the channel on the bottom of this piece here. But first I'm going to go ahead and create gathers on the top half to start the process of creating that round shape that this bottom of the sleeve has. If you find that pulling the string on one side is becoming too tense, you can go to the other side like I'm doing here and gradually push the gathers to the middle of your piece of your skirt, wherever you want to make your gathers. And usually it's your bobbing thread that you pull, and you just pull and push, pull and push. Next up, I'm going to be passing my elastic band through, and I like to use a safety pin for this because it just makes the work so much easier. So I'm just passing that into the channel, but I don't want my elastic to get lost, so I'm just going to quickly pin that other end of the elastic down to this side of the material with a pin, so I can confidently pass the elastic from this end to the other end without losing the elastic string in this channel. Once you arrive at the next end, you just need to remove your safety pin and connect it to the starting point of your elastic band. So I'm just going in here to use a pin to hold both ends of the elastic in place so they don't snag back into the channel. And next up, you need to sew up the side seam of this round shape that we've created. So I'm just going to sew it up on a 1 centimeter seam allowance from the beginning all the way to the end, and then go back in with a zigzag stitch to secure it in place. So I what I like about doing it like this is I'm going to catch the elastic band in those channels that we created, and I wouldn't have to think about this. So the reason why I can confidently sew like this is because I have created my elastic sort of place in the hem, and the top I have gathered to the extent that I can attach it to the top half of the sleeve. So as you can see, this thing actually worked. God, I was so happy, you have no idea. So I'm just going to go in and turn my top sleeve inside out, and then connect the hem of the top sleeve to the gathered end of this round shape. So the gathered end might not exactly be the same width. You might have to still pull and push and tug to sort of ensure that the hem of the sleeve fits the gathered end of that bottom half sort of correctly. As you can see, there were a few gaps which I sort of adjusted when I was sewing. So I'm just going to take this to my machine and sew on a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Just take your time, because the gathered end made that sort of seam really thick, so you just need to gradually push it and ease it in without having to break your needle or without having to make the sewing more painful for your machine. So if you find spots that you have sort of holes or gaps, you can just pleat them in or gather them in to the top hem of the sleeve. So once I'm done sewing the straight stitch, I'm going to go back in with a zigzag stitch to ensure that seam is nice and clean on the inside of the jumpsuit. So once I'm done doing this entire process for sleeve A, I'm going to repeat it for sleeve B to have the 2 sleeves to fit on the top half of the bodice. So once that is done, I'm going to go in and pin my sleeve into my armholes. I'm just passing the sleeve for the relevant side, and thankfully, because we created those notches, we know what side fits with what side. So I'm just using some pins to secure my sleeve into the armhole of the top bodice like this. I ended up having about 4 to 5 centimeters ease around the sleeve head, and what I did with that ease is I created 2 small pleats on the top of the sleeve. If you don't want to have ease, you have to go back to your pattern and sort of adjust the sleeve head in such a way that you don't have excess material on the top of your sleeve. Normally you have 2 to 3 cm, but 5 is quite a lot, and I just decided to pleat those 2 points in place, which I thought add a little bit of sort of edge and spice to the way the sleeve sat into the top half of the jumpsuit. So I'm just going to take this to my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew on a 1 centimeter seam allowance from one end all the way to the other, repeating the same on the left and the right hand side, and also going back in to do my zigzag stitch, which sort of acts as my overlocker at this point. And I'm just so happy that my domestic machine actually has a zigzag stitch, else I'd have been in serious trouble. So once that is done, the top half of the jumpsuit is finished. This is what it looks like, and I think it's a really cool top. You can actually stop here if you just want to make a really nice funky top that you can wear with a pair of jeans or with skirts, but because we're here for the jumpsuit, we have to go ahead and make the trouser, the pocket, and sort of connect them together around the waist of this top bodice. I have gone ahead and pinned in my darts for my front and back trouser pieces using the same method I used for the bodice, and I also cut out my pocket slant, which I forgot to do at the beginning. I just did that by going back to my pattern and adjusting it and then cutting on the front pieces. If you haven't seen the pocket tutorial already, that would be linked down below, and that would just make that sort of explanation more understandable. So in here, I'm just going in to sew my darts for my front and my back pieces using a normal straight stitch, ensuring to do my reverse stitch at the end so my darts are nice and secure. So now that I'm done stitching up my front, I hadn't pressed it at this point, that's why the darts actually look weird. I'm going to go ahead and work on my pocket. So I'm placing the pocket facing against the side sort of cutout that we made, and as you can see, is the same shape as the facing, and we're going to be sewing the facing right sides together to the front of the trouser. So I'm just starting from the top part and I'm sewing all the way to the middle and then to the side, ending it with a reverse stitch to ensure my facing is in place. After that, I'm going to go ahead and turn over the facing outwards like this, and I'm going to sew the facing together with the seam allowance. And what this is going to do is it's going to automatically tuck that seam inside of the pockets, and when you look inside of the pocket, you see this nice top stitch that I'm doing here, and it's about 3 centimeters wide, just to secure that facing inside of the pocket, so it doesn't do that weird folding thing that seams normally do if you don't sew them in some sort of way to keep them inside. So the front looks really nice, the pockets look great, but we need to attach the pocket bag. So I cut the pocket bag in print because I just thought it was a cool way to add extra edge to the bottom of the jumpsuit. And the next thing we need to do is to sew along this curved end, joining the facing to the pocket bag alone. You're not going to join it to the trouser, just facing to pocket bag along this curved end from the side all the way to the top, or vice versa. So once I'm done doing this for the left hand side, I will repeat the same for the right, because I want to have 2 pockets on the 2 sides of the jumpsuit. So as you can see, the reason why that top stitch we did really has a way of making the pocket look really clean and nice on the outside of the trouser. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to join my back panels to my front. Starting with the left hand side, as you can see here, I'm just pinning it together along the side seam, and this would automatically sandwich that pocket bag in place. So once I've pinned it for the left, I'm going to go ahead and do it the same for the right. I'm also going to go ahead and pin the inner leg or inseam of the trouser as well. So when I just take this to my machine, oh boy, I don't have to think about anything. I just know I am sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance on the outside and inside, and know that once I've done this for the left and the right hand side, I can connect the 2 sides of the trouser leg together along that crouch line to make an actual pair of trousers. So sewing using a normal straight stitch, I'm just sewing my front and back pieces together, as you can see here, on a 1 cm seam allowance all the way to the hem, ensuring I do my reverse stitch to keep that in place. So I'm also going to go ahead and just hem my edges, which is the hem of the trouser. I have folded by about 3.5 cm, and I just decided to just sew this all the way around without having to do like overlock and sew. And this will just enable me not to think about finishing up the hem later on in this tutorial. So this is what the edge of the trouser looks like, the outside seam and the inner seam as well. I think I didn't do the zigzag stitch. For some reason I just forgot. Maybe I was just too excited, but if you want to go ahead and overlock yours, you have the freedom to do that as well. As you can see, I've already gone ahead and I've folded my hem for the trouser, and I'm going on to pin my crouch line together. So I'm putting right sides together of the left and the right hand side, pinning first that middle point that the front and the back connects, and then pinning in the front together, pin the back, the center backs together, but ensure to leave a little bit of the center back, which your zip is going to sort of sit into, because you want your zip to go from your top into the bottom of your jumpsuit so you can actually get into it. And I left about 15 centimeters down the center back to allow for my zip. Once everything is pinned in place, I'm going to go ahead and sew from the front all the way to that 15 cm mark, which is going to become the crouch line for my trouser. So once that is done and complete, I'm going to go ahead and connect the top to the bottom along the waist here. So I've pinned center front to center front, dot to dot, center back to center back, and I'm going to sew along that waistline to actually connect the top to the bottom so we can actually have a jumpsuit. Else we'll just have a crop top and a high-waisted trouser. So I've pinned everything in place, and I'm going to be sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Remember to have your dots pointing backwards, because that's sort of how dots are supposed to sit when you sew them. So the ones in the front pointing backwards, the ones on the back pointing to the center back. And I'm just going in here to sew using a normal straight stitch from one end of the waistline to the other end. I'm also going to go back in with my trusty zigzag stitch to secure my waistline in place before fixing my zip on the center back of the jumpsuit. At this point, I was pleasantly surprised and impressed with how the jumpsuit was coming together. This is actually the first jumpsuit I'm making for myself. and I know the next one is going to be so much better, and I cannot wait to create that soon. So next up, I'm going to fix my zip and my facing to finish up my jumpsuit tutorial, and I've already pinned my zip in place. I've just pinned the left tape on the left side and the right tape on the right side. I didn't do anything special here. I just went ahead and I pinned everything in place before going in to sew the shoulder points of my facing, because we need the facing to finish the neckline as well as the top center back of the jumpsuit. So I'm just going to sew it with a 1 cm seam allowance using a normal straight stitch on the left and on the right shoulders. I'm also going to do a zigzag stitch around the hem so it looks nice and clean around the bottom of the facing before pinning the facing to the neckline of the top of this jumpsuit. So I'm just going to put right sides together of the facing to the right side of the main garment here, and I'm just pinning the center backs in place so that when you stitch the facing, you automatically will sandwich the zip on the top center back of the garment. So I've pinned my facing all the way around the center back, around the back neckline, around the front neckline to the other side of the center back, and I'm just going to sew from point A to point B using one continuous stitch. So I've changed to the zip footer, as you can see here, so I can actually sew the zip into the garment, and I'm just sewing slowly because this is an invisible zip and I'm using the wrong footer. You have to have the right footer to be able to fix this in, but this was the only pink zip I had in the house and I had to make it work somehow. So when you get to the top, you turn the needle in such a way that you face the neckline and you sew the back necklines together, you sew the front necklines together, and you return to the back neckline, you return to the center back, and you sew the other side of the zip tape. So you just do this entire journey with one stitch and you don't have to like unpick anything or do anything twice. So once you get to the other end, you just turn down to your zip tape and fix the other side of the zip tape to that side of the center back of the top bottom jumpsuit combination. So now that I've sewn my facing and my zip in place, I'm just going in here to trim off the corners of the center back, so once I turn this inside out it doesn't look too bulky. I'm also going to go ahead and cut some tiny snips along this neckline seam here, especially that front corner that this neckline has, because you want it to look sort of flat when you've turn the facing inside of the garment. So once I'm done cutting all my snips, I'm just going to turn this around like this so we can take a look to see if this neckline really looks clean and finished. I'm going to zip it up to check if the top is good, and yes, it is. The last thing I would like to do is I would like to do a top stitch like we did for the pocket. So a top stitch that holds the seam allowance to the facing, hence tucking that seam inside of the garment, and this is what the finished neckline looks like. I'm just going to go ahead and give this a press to finish off this jumpsuit process. So this is the finished look. I hope you guys enjoyed watching. This jumpsuit took me about 3 days to make, and it took me even longer to edit the video for you guys, but I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you recreate it for yourself. I'd like to thank House of Nini for being the original inspiration behind this jumpsuit design. I'm actually going to rock this on holiday. I'm not even lying, just with a pair of flats, a sun hat, sunglasses, and I'm heading for lunch during the summer. So if you enjoyed watching this video, please give it a thumbs up, leave all your comments, suggestions, tips, and ideas down below, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Bye.